when we started, it lasted 4 or 5 years, and it was ruthless. I mean, there were military planes flying over our house, and our phones were tapped for 5 years, and all sorts of things. I mean, it was bad and occasionally dangerous. But since that was during the Frey administration, and then once Ricardo Lagos assumed the presidency, that a lot of that, at least on the political military side, shifted around.
Welcome to Mongabay Sessions. I'm your host, Mongabay founder Rhett Butler. In this series, we'll be interviewing some of the world's leading conservation thinkers and doers about their experiences and what can be done to make the world a better place. Thank you for watching, and I hope you enjoy.
I'm here with Kris Tompkins of Tompkins Conservation for another episode of Mongabay Sessions. Thank you for joining me. What sparked your interest in nature and conservation?
Oof, I think those answers always have mice with long tails. You know, it's hard to know where it really begins, but I grew up, and you'll hear this on my TED Talk. We all grew up on our great-grandfather's ranch here, exactly where I am now. And so the out of doors was for us like indoors. There wasn't much distinction. We were outside most of the time, although that was not it. There was an assumption about the out of doors, and that was it. I don't think I really understood. Well, I know I didn't understand what beauty was and the nature of nature until the 70s, probably. My first husband was an expedition climber, and I grew up in the climbing tribe. And so we were ski racers, and, you know, I began to fall in love with the beauty of nature and the power of nature, being in it, not just of it, which is how I grew up, but actually in it and participating in it. And then in the early 80s, I began to see, largely through Yvon Chouinard, that these places we took for granted was exactly that. We were taking them for granted, that in fact, we had to learn how to read what was actually happening in these places we loved so much. And that was kind of a new dawn for me, and certainly influenced the last third of my life.
So from that upbringing, you eventually joined Patagonia and I mean, eventually took the helm of it, which you turned the company into this model of corporate responsibility, which continues to this day and is very impressive. So what inspired you to take that approach at Patagonia?
Oh, that was completely 100% Yvon. I met Yvon when I was 15 years old, and during my college years, our mother complained to me that I looked at her as a bank, and that contrary to my assumptions, I had to get summer jobs. So I started working for Yvon in the summertime. Then when I graduated from college, I had no idea what I was going to do. And so I started working for him full time, and it was still just rock and ice climbing equipment in those days. And then a year or two later, he wanted to make clothes for all of us, you know, and that's how we started Patagonia. And there were only 6 of us. And then in a few years, I became the general manager, and I don't know when we started calling me the CEO, but I was that for a very long time. And then when I was 43, I retired and went to South Chile with Doug.
So once you retired, I mean, you came from this background of working in the corporate sector. So
Yeah.
what did you take from that experience of Patagonia into your conservation work as well as your philanthropy?
Oh, I think there's a lot that you take with you. I think probably the most the two most important things. One, you have a sense of order and finance and budgets and a kind of discipline that I think comes out of growing a business, a successful business, and the discipline that that requires. And most especially, which is a lot of personality driven too. And Doug was, and I am pretty much this way, is very results driven. We focus on something and we're going to be the dog with the bone until we get it. There's a sense of being extremely results driven and relentless, because conservation has so many pitfalls along the way that you have to learn to just drive past those and keep going and going. And I think that again, our personalities probably like that, but also business trains you, I think, to do things you might not imagine you could do.
So on that pitfalls front, there was a lot of contentiousness in Chile in the early days of your protecting your work.
Boy, isn't that an understatement?
So how are your efforts perceived by the public in the region today?
Oh, no, I think when we started, it lasted 4 or 5 years and it was ruthless. I mean, there were military planes flying over our house and our phones were tapped for 5 years and all sorts of things. I mean, it was bad and occasionally dangerous. But since that was during the Frey administration, and then once Ricardo Lagos assumed the presidency, that a lot of that, at least on the political military side, shifted around. But it was tough because two foreigners arriving in a country, buying up large tracts of land, a lot of it forest, and not cutting it. So that was highly suspicious. When I look at it now, this is a full generation ago. I understand why there was tremendous suspicion and discord over what we were doing, but I didn't understand it then. I wish I knew then what I know now, and I would have probably passed through that period a lot more calmly than I did. But we were accused of everything, creating a new Jewish state, even though we were raised Anglicans, a nuclear waste dump for the United States, that we would take all the cattle out of South Chile and replace it with American bison, and military territory for Argentina to come in and finish Chile off once and for all. But that was a long time ago, and that has utterly changed. We've donated many national parks in Chile and built infrastructure so that all are welcome and very participative in local communities, regional communities. So that era has long been over with, although of course, we know that there are people who run counter to conservation in general, regardless of where it is. You're going up against the model of industrial production. And when you do that, of course, it doesn't matter where you are, you're going to get in the crosshairs of somebody. That's definitely always the case.
I can imagine. Has the gift of these areas to the people of Chile as public lands had any ripple effects on the broader idea of philanthropy in the region?
I think it's slowly starting to take place. I do. On philanthropy specifically, but what has really changed are the number of families or individuals who are creating their own parks. They may not want to gift them to the government and to all Chileans or Argentines as we have, but that's astounding. I mean, that's how far things have evolved since we started. It's amazing the number of private parks that there are, people really looking at their land and the acquisition of land through another lens. And that's not true in all cases, but it's very significant. Yeah. So in terms of what we Americans understand as philosophy, also philanthropy, that's slower going. The raw act of donating, supporting issues that fall outside of education or the arts or health, which are all necessary as well. Yeah. But, you know, it's an evolution, as in all things.
And so since I pick up on the evolution point, since you started this endeavor, you've embarked on rewilding as a major component of your work.
Yes,
In both Chile and Argentina,
that's right.
which is also contentious for some people. Are people starting to come around on the idea of rewilding like they did with the creation of what are now public lands?
Well, you really have to go by species. The one species whom we've been working with for 10 years, jaguars in northeastern Argentina, of all the species, top predator, it was the easiest socially and culturally to bring back, because the Correntinos, the Corrientes province, have always seen the jaguar, who's been missing since the 1930s, as their kind of mascot or spirit. You know, their boldness and strength is represented through the jaguar, which none of them have seen for 90 years. So that was a real shock. We were really prepared for years and years of kind of preparing ourselves and the province and the country for the return of these jaguars. And we were happily surprised by that. By and large, rewilding doesn't cause much trouble. We have had a lot of discussion about pumas in southern Chile, because they've really been decimated along with foxes over the last 80 years. As long as there have been livestock estancias down there, that the systematic killing of predators, of course, as they are everywhere, is prevalent. So there have been individuals and some mayors who are very unhappy with the idea that these top predators are coming back. But by and large, rewilding is seen as a positive thing. We had much more trouble with land, large scale land in the beginning than we have with rewilding extirpated species.
But that's interesting.
Yeah.
So what and how is the rewilding effort going so far?
Well, it's a good time to ask me, because it's going smashingly well, considering we have jaguars free in Ibarra National Park today. And that's taken, as I said, 10 years. So that happened about 6 weeks, 2 months ago. The first ones are out there living free, as I said, for the first time in 70 to 90 years. And we have more who are on deck, some cubs and their mother. The cubs need to be a couple months older, and then they too will go. And so they really are coming back. And we have 2 cubs in another national park in northern Argentina that will start the population in that national park where there are no jaguars. Also, yeah, I'm very proud of the teams who run all those things. Well, I'm proud of everyone, but rewilding is quite hands-on. It could be midnight, it can be 10 in the morning. Rewilding is a 24/7 job for different teams. And it's tough work. And a lot of the things we've done, we were the first people to do it. So we were the first people to have to set the regulations between Brazil and Argentina to move animals back and forth of varying types of species, or province to province. So there was a lot of regulatory work that had to be designed and actually implemented. So the next projects wouldn't have to go through that over and over again. So I will tell you that the people, the team members who work on the ground with these species, it's a little like some of the people whom you may know working in the bush in Africa. They go out and they're there for months, years, very committed on the ground in these special areas with these special species. And they're like that. They're the reason that we've had a lot of success.
Just as an aside, we Mongabay covered the Jaguar release several weeks back.
I saw that. I was very grateful for that. It was a great article. I was really appreciative. I think it was the first one that came out, and we wanted to make sure that the government of Corrientes, the government of the national government, Argentine national parks, because there would be no jaguars on the ground without them, without their desire to have them there. And so we really are congratulating them more than anything else.
Yeah, it's always nice to have those positive conservation stories.
Ooh, I know. There's so many that aren't, that are tough.
So changing gears a little bit. So we know protected areas are a proven intervention for conservation, but by definition will always be limited in extent. So what do you see as ways to drive systemic change needed to address the broader drivers of environmental degradation and destruction, kind of on a society or economy-wide level?
That's a very big question. That's a huge question, because when you look at what's driving climate change and species extinction and all the things we talk about, the globalized industrial economy is the muscle for this. And of course, heads of sovereign states have a lot of power, relative power, but basically everything is driven by the economics, the global economic system. So that makes dealing with it a lot tougher. And when you think about Trump being our president for 4 years, now Biden's in, even it's just like a CEO in a corporation. They come in and out on roller skates, and you're sort of at right now, Biden is very attentive toward climate change and rolling back some of the policies of Trump and monuments here in the States and so on and so forth. So, it's a cascading effect of consumerism is driven by consumers, and consumers have to understand that what we do affects all these things we think we care about. And it's very hard to get people to voluntarily change their habits. Now, this year with the pandemic, I've been encouraged by the fact that globally people can change on a dime when they're forced to. The problem is we are forced to, and the suffering that has accompanied this event is so high. But it did show me that we can change our behavior. radically and very quickly. But I spend a lot of time thinking about, one of my hobbies is reading and thinking about the collapse of civilizations, because I keep thinking, why do we keep doing this over and over again? And there is a lot of overlap in terms of what the conditions are when civilizations collapse, whether it's Rome or the Mayans or Easter Island and the Khmer. So the question, at least as I understood it, is really complex, and I generally feel that human behavior changes in a climate of adversity, and we're very slow or simply bad at changing our mode of life voluntarily. So I think it takes a pandemic, it takes people freezing to death in Texas and all these other things that really begin to change people's behavior, and ergo change the kind of leadership that they need. That's my personal thought on that.
Yeah. So, I mean, on that front, speaking specifically to Patagonia, what has been the impact of COVID on your work in that region?
In the Southern Cone?
Yeah.
Very little. We have actually, I would say, been working more fluidly as a team since we were all stuck in one place, because for years, decades, we've always been in the field or going to London, giving a talk, or I don't know, everybody's moving around, and it's very hard to come together and do deep planning and things like that. So we have found that for our work in Chile and Argentina and here in the States, it's actually been helpful that we're all stuck in one place, because the communication is daily and fast, and it's just one of those things where we're lucky in that it turned out to be, for us, positive, forcing us to get a lot of the work done face to face or Zoom to Zoom that we kind of struggled with before, because everybody moves around so much.
That's interesting. I mean, Mongabay has always been a virtual enterprise, so the pandemic hasn't affected sort of our work culture that much, because we've been doing this the whole time.
Right.
So, but yeah. Anyway, so you kind of touched on this a bit. I want to see if you might want to expand on it, but if not, we can move on. But do you see long-term opportunities for conservation arising from the post-pandemic recovery?
I always see opportunities. I don't see more opportunities coming out of a pandemic, but I see a lot of opportunities. I mean, we're moving on a lot of stuff that we have had a sort of second generational master plan. I started before we finalized all the donations to Chile and to Argentina. I wanted to know, where are we going past that, even though we had another 18 months to really finalize everything. And last June, we pulled the trigger on a lot of stuff. And before that, in Argentina as well. So there's a lot of opportunity out there. And I think that there's opportunity politically. So it's not just, do I see physically spaces where specifically Tompkins conservation could make a big difference on a fairly large scale again? That's what we go for. But I think politically, this is a moment here in the States, for example. I mean, if I was working up here, I see 4 or 5 things on a large scale I would go after fast, because you don't get these kinds of moments that often. And when you see one, you should throw everything at it. So yeah, I think there's tremendous opportunity. I see a lot of new rewilding efforts going on around the world. Rewilding Britain, hard to imagine being able to rewild Britain, but they're doing it, and extraordinarily so. So yeah, I'm very optimistic and geared up for a lot of conservation and rewilding. And we're looking at the sea and land. We don't look just at land anymore.
And so do you actively engage with other initiatives in other countries, provide learnings or lessons from what you've done?
We do it informally. Anything, especially, anything we do, if somebody wants to know how we do it, and especially in rewilding, all the technical side of which there is a lot there, we share everything. Somebody wants to know about Jaguar breeding. Somebody wants to know about how to put together large landscapes and how to look at it and so on. We are completely open book in that sense. Yeah, definitely. Because for us, the only thing that matters is that the net increase of territory preserved and species returned to their rightful places is what matters to us. It could be us, it can be someone else. We don't really care. The net effect is what is the net effect. So yeah, we do a lot of that.
So I want to return back to the broader transformational question I asked earlier. And, I spoke with Jennifer Morgan, who's the head of Greenpeace International this week, and I just she had a quote which I thought was relevant. I just wanted your take on it, or you agree. Or so here, the quote is, while politics and leaders certainly can influence culture and norms, we believe culture has much more influence on politics and leaders. So where culture goes, politicians either follow or lose elections, and companies can either change or go bankrupt. So, I mean, it kind of gets at what you spoke to in terms of consumer behavior, but just love to hear if you would expand on that or agree on it. Or
I wouldn't tend to agree with her. I wish I could. I do. But culture is driven by economics today. It's not the other way around. And so I would see rather the converse of that statement.
That's interesting.
I think that technology, and you can say that capitalism is a kind of technology. Yeah, I don't think culture originally came about when humans started to gather. It was a way to protect one another. It could have been 5 people, it could have been 100 people. Culture is built to protect the home fires, let's say. And that is not what's happening today. And cultures around the world are hammered by this overlay of production and harvest and consumerism. So no, I would disagree with her.
Okay, that's interesting. So the last question on my list, and we can talk more if you'd like afterwards, but would be, what would you say to young people who are distressed about the current trajectory of the planet?
Well, I get asked this a lot, and usually it comes in the form of what can people do? And I've been thinking a lot about this, and the number one thing they should ask themselves is, why are you asking me what I think they can do? Because the number one thing you can do is figure out what are the root causes of our circumstances and what has to be done. And I don't care if it's 2 meters out your front door, it's in your town, it's in your state, it's in your country. People have to at least have the curiosity and drive to figure out what's going on around them. Is the Greta effect. Anybody marching in your town on Fridays? You have to decide what's meaningful to you. And then you have to just open up your freaking eyes and your ears and decide. Activism, and it doesn't have to be radical. It doesn't have to be the Extinction Rebellion. It can be just acting. The act of acting is activism. And no one can tell me what I could be doing. I don't know where you are. I don't know how old you are. I don't know what you love. But I do know that the moment in our human history to be sitting on the sidelines, we are so far past that. Anybody who is not using whatever it is they have, and I say this in my TED Talk, to fight for the things that you love or the things you know to be true, or those things you know are not right, then you have to have that 2 inches of motivation to do something, and not just in your computer screen, but walk outside and declare yourself to be part of a movement that is not going away. The social movements, the ecological movements they're growing, they're not going away. And you can be so young and step in on the front line of that. And I think this has a lot to do with, I get asked a lot, are you hopeful? And I really have come to dislike the word hope, because I think in many cases, and not all, it implies a sort of abdication. I have hope because you guys, very specifically, you guys are out there and you're having conversations about things that are difficult or on the edges of things. I think hope has to be earned. I don't think you get to have hope unless you're part of it, an active part of creating hope. Otherwise, you're just waiting for someone else. Your hope is not, it's not dependent on your own actions. And this, I think, is really dangerous and takes the life out of our hearts. I really do. So what people can do is decide and remember that what you do with your life defines who you are. So if you're wringing your hands and worried about what's happening on your street or in your town, and you just wring your hands, then you deserve the outcome that you're going to get. If you get out in your street, in your town, and you work towards something better for everybody in all life, then you might still lose the battle, but you'll have participated in something that will be one of the highlights of your life, and it will define the rest of your life. That's what I think.
It's very well put. So are there other things you'd like to talk about? We've covered everything that was on my list.
No, I think in my heart of hearts, I just hold out that this distance between someone who's a conservationist, someone who's a leader, someone who is worried about the quality of the water coming in through their faucets, that the gap between those who are thinking about that stuff and those who are kind of looking over the wall and kind of seeing that it's going on, but they don't know what to do. They do know what to do. If I went to a 7-year-old right now and said, have you ever heard about the climate changing and da da da? Yeah. Does this person know anything about it? The specs and the disaster? Maybe not. But if I said, let's go do something about it, whatever that is, they go immediately. People want to be asked. People want to be told that they can stand up and go become little activists, young activists, 80-year-old activists. It is the participative role in society that we've lost. And that's what happens to civilizations that collapse. There is a centralization of power, or the assumption that you will take care of everything. So I'm just going to sit and wait until you do. And it really doesn't work that way.
Mongabay.